This video is about solving using the quadratic formula. So in this lesson, you will learn to use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equation. So the solutions, or x-intercepts, of a quadratic equation, which has the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, are x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Something that you need to remember is that x may be referred to as a solution and x-intercept a root or a 0. All of these mean the same thing. So before we start using the quadratic formula, let's look at how we used to solve these equations using a calculator. So in our first example, we have the equation x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. So we're going to enter that equation into our calculator. So remember, whatever is on the left side of the equal sign is going to represent our y1, and whatever's on the right side of the equation is going to represent our y2. So in the calculator, we're going to go to y equals, and we're going to enter our equation in x squared minus 6x plus 5, and y2 is going to equal 0. If you need to reset your window, you can just hit zoom 6, and you should get a parabola looking graph. So I'm going to draw a sketch of my graph. So I have my x and y axes, and then I have my parabola. Now notice the parabola is crossing the x-axis in two spots, which means we're going to have two solutions. So to find our solutions, we need to find the intersection point. So we're going to go to second, trace, option 5 for intersect. The blinking cursor needs to move close to the intersection point. Once it's close enough, remember, you have to hit enter 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So notice on the calculator it says intersection, and it gives us a point. So our first intersection is 1, 0. We need to do the same thing again. So second, trace, 5. We're going to move our blinking cursor to the second intersection point. And we're going to hit enter 3 times. And this intersection point is 5, 0. So remember, when we're looking for our solution, we only care about the x-coordinate. So we're going to have x equals 1 and x equals 5. Now, instead of always using a graphing calculator to find the intersection points, we can also use the quadratic formula. So when we use the quadratic formula, you got to make sure that your equation is in standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You need to values. If there is a negative, make sure that you keep that with that value. And then we are going to substitute the values into the quadratic formula. And we're going to solve. So let's look at the example we just did with a calculator, and let's use the quadratic formula. So the number in front of the x squared is a 1 for our a value. In front of the x is negative 6 for the b value. And the constant is 5 for the c value. So we're going to substitute into the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is negative times the b value plus or minus the square root of our b value squared minus 4 times the a value times the c value all over 2 times the a value. So this is what x is going to equal. So first we're going to simplify this. So we get x equals 2 negatives make a positive, plus or minus the square root. Under the square root, I can stick this all into a calculator. So parenthesis negative 6, close parenthesis squared, minus 4 times 1 times 5, which gets us 16. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. So when we get x is equal to, we have to break this apart because there's a plus and a minus sign. So there are two values that x equals. So x equals 6 minus the square root of 16 over 2, and x equals 6 plus the square root of 16 over 2. When we stick these in our calculator, we're going to do the numerator first and then divide by our denominator. So for the first x, we have 6 minus the square root of 16, which gets us our numerator, and then we're going to divide by the denominator. So we get x equals 1. And when we do our second equation, 6 plus the square root of 16, and then divided by 2, we get that x equals 5. So notice, because there was a positive number underneath the square root, you're going to get two different x values because you are adding and subtracting that number to that 6. So let's look at another problem. Make sure that it's in quadratic standard form first, which means this 1 needs to get moved to the other side. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. 4x squared minus 6x plus 1 is equal to 0. So my a value in this case is 4, my b value is negative 6, and my c value is 1. So I'm going to substitute those into the quadratic formula. So I get x equals negative times the b value plus or minus the square root of the b value squared minus 4 times the a value times the c value, all over 2. So this time, when I simplify, I get x equals 6 plus or minus. I need to figure out what's going to go underneath that radical, so negative 6 squared. Make sure that you put the negative 6 in parentheses, otherwise it will square it wrong and give you a negative when it should be a positive. Minus 4 times 1. So we get plus or minus the square root of 20 all over 2 times the a value, which in this case is 2 times 4, which gets us 8. So x is equal to 6 minus the square root of 20 divided by 8, and x is equal to 6 plus the square root of 20 over 8. So we're going to put those into our calculator. So in the first one, we get 6 minus the square root of 20, and divide that by the denominator, which is 8 in this case. And we get x equals 0.19. And do the same thing again, 6 plus the square root of 20, and then divided by 8. And we get x equals 1.31. So notice, anytime that you have a positive number underneath the square root, that you're going to get two solutions for your x. So let's look at another example. So in this case, I need to move the 3 to the other side first. And we get 3x squared minus 6x plus 3 equals 0. So my a value is 3, my b value is negative 6, and my c value is 3. So I'm going to substitute again. So x equals negative times the b value plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times the a value. So when I simplify, two negatives make a positive. So we have positive 6 plus or minus. We're going to figure out what we get underneath our radical. So square root, or parenthesis, negative 6 squared minus 4 times 3 gets us 0. 2 times 3 gets us 6. So x is equal to 6 minus the square root of 0 over 6, and x equals 6 plus the square root of 0 over 6. So in my calculator, for the first solution, I'm going to do 6 minus the square root of 0, and then divide by 6, and we get x equals 1. Then I'm going to try it again where I add the square root. So 6 plus the square root of 0, divide by 6, also gets me 1. So notice, when there is a 0 underneath the square root, that you're going to get only one solution for your x. Let's look at one last example. So first I need to get this in standard form, so I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. 9x squared minus 5x plus 1 is equal to 0. So my a value is in front of the x squared, which is 9. My b value is in front of the x, which is 5. And my c value is the constant, which is 1. So when I do quadratic formula, x equals negative times the b value plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times the a value times the c value all over 2 times the a value. So I get x equals 5 plus or minus. I need to do my square root. So negative parenthesis negative 5 squared minus 4 times 9 times 1 gets us negative 11 all over 18. Now here I have a negative number underneath my square root. When I get a negative number underneath my square root, remember negative square roots are not possible, because if I do the square root of negative 11, my calculator says non-real answer. So whenever this happens and you have a negative underneath your square root, this is a no real solution. So we will not get a value for x in this case.